Hello. This is a special episode of the New Statesman podcast from the New Statesman Spotlight team. We cover policy for those who shape it and the businesses it affects. I'm Suze Cooper. In this episode, we're discussing the future of work in 21st century Britain. Flexible work, particularly that found in the gig economy, has existed for decades, but technological developments over the last 10 years or so have made it more accessible and visible to both the people who use it and those who work in it. These technological advances and shifts in British industry have sparked a move away from 9-to-5 presenteeism towards more dynamic, flexible ways of working. The result is an emerging work culture that acknowledges work-life balance and offers workers choice and flexibility when it comes to choosing their careers. But what is the right balance between job autonomy and job security? Is there a world where an evolving labour market provides proper workers protections with union representation while maintaining flexibility? And can the gig economy be improved to benefit workers, consumers and service providers while supporting growth? As Uber and GMB approach the 3-year anniversary of their groundbreaking recognition agreement, the first of its kind in the gig economy, we'll discuss these issues and more. This episode is sponsored by Uber, marking over a decade of operating in the UK. Our panel of guests include Uber's UK General Manager Andrew Brem and Sir Stephen Timms, MP for East Ham since 1994 and Chair of Parliament's Work and Pensions Select Committee. I'm also delighted to have someone who works at the heart of one of the UK's largest trade unions, the GMB National Secretary, Andy Prendergast. Welcome to all of you. Before we get into our discussion, we're going to hear directly from someone who works in the gig economy about their experiences. Eniola has been an Uber driver for 8 years. We talked about her perspectives of working in the gig economy and how she has seen it change. Welcome, Eniola.
Hi, welcome.
So can you tell me a little bit about how long you've been driving with Uber and what made you decide to start driving with them?
I've been driving with Uber since 2019. I went into a period where I wasn't working and I did a lot of driving for my church. I volunteer and driving up and down the country. And someone sort of jokingly said, why don't you do Uber? So it was in a lull in working and it was a case of you get your own hours. There are loads of benefits. I have a friend who messaged me on my way here and says, you really do love Uber, don't you? I said, it's a flexibility and I just wish I'd done it, going on 11 years now when they first started.
So what do you really value about this type of work then?
It's the flexibility. I remember what it was like when we just had minicabs and black cabs. And there weren't any benefits. Over the years, they've introduced things like childcare and so on and so forth. Uber also introduced the pension scheme. You could opt in or opt out. I mean, obviously, as I get older, the fact that I'm coming nearer to pension age, so I opt in. I don't think everywhere in the gig economy have they made that possible.
So Uber's had a recognition agreement with GMB Union for nearly 3 years now. Are you a member? And if so, what's made you decide to join?
I decided to join for two reasons. One, it was easy. It was one of those things, I'll do it. But then having, the opportunity to do it at the hub was quite easy because I went into the hub for something else and the gentleman was there. And I was like, may as well. It's something you can do for under a tenner or under £20, depending on what kind of cover you need or you choose, etc. I would recommend it. Even if you feel you can fight your own battles, having them in your back pocket is kind of handy because you've kind of got someone helping you just check the I's and the T's are in the right place.
You also drive an electric vehicle, I understand. So what's made you decide to make that switch?
Money. It's a case of, I like the cars. That helps. But it was the incentives that were given. Everything from the fact that, I didn't have to pay congestion charge every day coming into town. And for me, it was a case of, it's just less bother. If I had to buy one, I would probably go a plug-in hybrid because of the longer distance, and so on. But with this, it's just... It just teaches you planning. You have to plan your journeys. You have to decide, how much can you do based on when you have to recharge and so on and so forth. And you know what? It forces you to rest. So that was a good thing. It was, but the initial incentive was the options that were put out there, the initiatives that were put out there. It made it an attractive switch.
Over the last few years, we've obviously seen, particularly in the gig economy, that technology has kind of really come into it and has really changed it in lots of different ways. As an Uber driver and a company that really is hinged on an app, does that make a difference to you as a worker?
It does. It just makes it easier to do. I can put my app on without logging in and see how busy it is out there. Okay, it's busy enough. Go work now. And then just literally get into the car and you start work. Whereas previously you had to go in, you have to radio in, you have to be in radio distance and all of this sort of thing. You also have a button on there for safety, so you can, if you feel concerned but you can't stop and you can't talk, you can just press a button, subtly that just looks like you're raising your hand, and you can let people know. They can track your vehicle and, bring help to you wherever you end up. It gives you a bit more confidence when you're doing something that might, that's public facing. Those kind of things make it attractive to me.
So you really feel like this flexible working has given you a work-life balance that you're happy with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have many people who do a 9 to 5, whether full-time or part-time, and then do this afterwards. And inadvertently, they're able to oftentimes earn more in the part-time than they do in the full-time. And people just take full-time because it's, you've got a mortgage or you're trying to apply for a mortgage and you need that record, And I think if companies, or particularly Uber, hint, was able to liaise with mortgage companies to say, right, if you've been on the app for so many years, you're earning whatever, you can offer them a mortgage. I think you'll get a lot more people on.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Welcome. It was lovely being here.
So we've heard from Eniola about her experience, but what about the work being done to protect and improve conditions for flexible workers and those relying on the gig economy? Stephen, I'll come to you first. How do you think the nature of work has changed in the UK in the last 10 years, particularly during your time as chair of the Work and Pensions Committee?
Well, I've been chairing the committee for the last 4 years, but I think if you look back over 10 years, we have seen a big increase in the number of people in precarious work of one sort or another. The expansion of the gig economy has been a big feature of the UK economy. Over the 4 years that I've been chairing the committee, the first meeting of the committee that I chaired was in March 2020. And then the following week, we went into lockdown. So since then, the pandemic, I think, has prompted a very big increase in the take-up of technology, and that's changed many people's work patterns. I don't think we would have been able to do what we're doing in recording this podcast today more than 4 years ago. So a lot of people's work has been changed by that, and some of those changes have been positive and some of them haven't. Some of them have been created difficulties for people. The Select Committee comes at this from the perspective of the need for people to be saving for a pension. Thanks to the success of the auto-enrollment policy, we've seen a very big increase in the number of employees who are saving for a pension. It was about 44% in 2012. By 2020, it was almost twice that, 86% proportion of eligible employees saving for a pension. But amongst self-employed people, the change has been in the opposite direction. 25 years ago, about half of self-employed people were saving for a pension. Today, it's fewer than 1 in 6. And because we've treated people in the gig economy generally as self-employed, very few people who are working there at the moment are saving for a pension.
So, Andrew, we've heard there about the auto-enrolment onto the pension scheme. How did Uber go about creating that? And kind of given this was the first scheme of its kind, would you like to see that kind of replicated throughout the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was groundbreaking. We were the first business to create a scheme for gig economy workers. And obviously we collaborated with our pensions partners, so Now Pensions and Adecco, to make it all happen. But there was a lot of innovation required to reflect the fact that people who are driving on the Uber platform do have total flexibility to drive, 1 trip, 0 trips, or however many trips they can fit in a reasonable number of hours of the week. And so that was a groundbreaking design of the scheme. But actually, it's worked out to be very, very effective. The majority of drivers have remained in the scheme. So we have an auto-enrollment approach. Obviously, we do that. Some drivers choose to opt out, but the majority have stayed in the scheme. And, they're contributing 5%, Uber's contributing 3%. And I think, as Stephen said, this is really crucial for society and for the economy as a whole, that people are positively encouraged to save for the future. We've made innovations, sometimes in partnership with the GMB on the scheme. So we introduced a Sharia compliant fund shortly after the initial launch. And again, that's proving popular with drivers. So no, I think we're on a start of a journey on that. It's worked out well so far. I absolutely believe that other similar participants in the platform work should be providing absolutely the same sorts of options for people who are working on the platform, because the statistics that Stephen quoted are concerning, and I think it's important that people find it very, very easy and are encouraged to save for the future.
And Andy, I'd like to hear from you about this, because as an organisation that represents the workers, how important is it that they have this access to the pension funds?
Well, it's absolutely critical, and it's one of the issues we have found in the gig economy, and particularly while the questions on status continue in terms of whether you're worker status or self-employed, because we have had some providers in the gig economy actually say that they can't provide a pension because to do so would further complicate the issue of the status. So effectively, as we sit here at the moment, there's a disincentive for that to be provided. And one of the things I think we're seeing right across the economy is the amount of state support is in doubt, if we're going to be honest. We have far more of a problem now than traditionally in terms of the amount of people in private rented accommodation getting into their retirement. And quite simply, the sums do not add up. So it's very important that people have that opportunity. I think Uber have taken an important step. I think for a union, I'm going to be absolutely honest, we'd ideally like to see those contribution rates rise over time. I don't think the 8% is enough, and I'm not saying that just to Uber. I think that that's the government minimum, but it needs to improve. But this is really about giving people, the sustainability of the job, giving them a decent retirement, which is what we want. And one of the real concerns we have is as they got rid of the statutory retirement age, more and more people are having to work longer and longer, not because of choice, which we always support, but because of necessity, and that can't be good for the nation.
Stephen, what would you say the response of policymakers on all sides of the political spectrum has been to this eruption in the gig economy and flexible working?
Well, there's been a recognition on the part of the government that some of the categories are a bit unclear. And we had a promise from the government some years ago now that it would bring forward an employment bill to make the position clear, but they've never produced it. There's still no sign of this bill, and I think they said that, well, we're coming out of the pandemic now, so people are thinking about other things, and we won't do it. But there is, I think, a really pressing need for this. I mean, we need to just remember it was the Supreme Court decision that went against Uber, which brought about the change of heart on Uber's part. And I must say, I think Uber has done a fantastic job, a dramatic turnaround of their approach. Jamie Hayward, who was then running Uber in the UK, gave evidence to our committee in June 2022, and he made the point that he thought the Supreme Court had done a brilliant job in its judgment, because it both enabled Uber's business model to continue and also delivered the protections for workers that the GMB and the individual drivers who went to court were looking for. But you can't have a situation where these things are determined on the basis of court battles between individual groups of workers and their employers. We need a clear legal framework within which these things are determined. And the position at the moment is that if you're driving for Uber, you're contributing to a pension, and Uber makes its contribution as well. But when you're driving for a different platform, you don't. And Jamie Hayward told my committee that following the Supreme Court decision, he felt the legal position is clear for taxi and private vehicle hire that drivers are workers and should be auto-enrolled and have access to the other protections as well. But Uber's competitors are not taking that view, and they're not meeting what I think should be, and actually probably are, their legal obligations.
Andrew, can you give us a little bit of perspective on what a company like Uber is offering private hire drivers and how you got to that point?
What we offer is, first of all, the pension that we've heard a bit about. Associated with that and the worker status of drivers on the Uber platform, they also are guaranteed the national living wage, although the vast majority of drivers earn well above that. But in addition to that, they also receive holiday pay. And I think that's also important, to have some money to put aside to ensure you have some rest periods if that's what you choose to do. So that package of benefits and rights, I think, is really, really important. So we now have well over 100,000 people driving every week on the Uber platform, and it's grown hugely since the end of the pandemic. So, at one level, from a commercial point of view, that's great, because we'd love to have more drivers, and that means that when someone orders an Uber, it arrives faster and so on. On the other hand, that does, of course, add significant cost into the business. It's cost that we respect. It's cost that is worthwhile. But it is, of course, absurd that it's cost that this business incurs and other businesses don't incur. But, I think it doesn't end there. And I think what's good is that, like any business, we're in a competitive environment. And so we also offer other things to drivers as well. So, yes, they are automatically included in other protections, such as sickness or injury or maternity or paternity benefits. And we also regard that as good, because at the end of the day, the beauty of the gig economy, it is trip by trip by trip. And for every trip, we know very well we have to win. We call them the riders, the passengers, the customers. Equally, we have to win the driver to come and choose to do that trip. And it really is at a trip level that this freedom of choice exists.
So let's think a bit wider again and broader about the people that are actually working in the gig economy. Andy, what's the GMB hearing from workers around their feelings and attitudes towards this way of working?
I think the answer to that depends very much on what the worker's used to, what their experience is, and fundamentally what they want. One of the big reasons why we took on Uber wasn't just about the Uber drivers we'd recruited. It was also trying to almost ring fence the gig economy. Many of our workers, and we have over 500,000 members, they want fundamentally what I want, which is I want regularity of hours, I want regularity of earnings, I want to be able to plan my life explicitly around that. And I think for lots of our members, one of the great worries with the gig economy is this going to start bleeding into their jobs? Is this going to affect their future? So part of the reason we took the case was not about the Uber members, but it's about the whole membership. And that's one of the things unions do all the time. At the same point, what we had was people in the gig economy. And for many of them, the flexibility is absolutely everything. And when I say about flexibility, I don't just mean about when you work, it's about where you work. So, we have people who are members who work for Uber. They work when they want, how they want. Sometimes they'll be sat at home, there's nothing on the television. Well, I'll go and earn a couple of hours. I was talking to a member recently who said, a sudden unexpected school trip and actually an hour and a half's work, and he actually had the money in his account to pay for the school trip. That's something that really works for a lot of our members. And also people have caring responsibilities, who sit there and say, well, I will only do trips, but I'll only do them in a small radius. It allows me to, if that call comes, then I've got to drop off a passenger and I'll be there within 5 minutes. So I think one of the things we've had to recognise is what people want is fundamentally different depending on who they are. But within that, people need to know that they have the ability to earn enough to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, support themselves and their families. They want to know that the jobs are going to continue, and they fundamentally want to plan about their lifestyle. So I think for us it's been okay, well, how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that the rights that Andrew's talked about, the holidays, the pensions, these shouldn't be things people volunteer for. These should be basic sort of building blocks of civilized life. And that's very much what we're pushing for and working and making some headway in getting them for our members.
Stephen, how do we achieve the right balance then between these protections on the one hand and the choice, flexibility and autonomy on the other?
Well, I think the key is in defining worker status clearly in law so that everybody knows what the position is. And there's no doubt there is a lot of benefit for workers and for employers in the flexibility that we've seen. And I don't think anyone wants to throw that away, but it does need to be on the basis of the safeguards that Andy's just set out, that people can have confidence in. The Labour Party's New Deal for Working People plans includes a proposal for a single status of worker for everybody but the genuinely self-employed. Quite what the government was going to put into its employment bill, if we'd ever had it, I don't know. But one way or another, we've got to have a position which is clear, where all the employers are operating within the same rules, and where the basic safeguards that, as Andy says, everybody wants are in place. I think Uber's done well. I think the partnership between Uber and GMB has been really interesting and effective, and is a very good model. I visited an Uber site recently, the place where drivers in East London go whenever they've got any issues, and I've noticed there's a GMB desk inside for people to go and talk about their union issues while they're there. That's a really good approach, and I think we ought to be seeing that kind of approach taking up much more widely across this industry and other industries where the gig economy has become so important.
So, Andrew, what are we getting right then, and what are we getting wrong when it comes to confronting these modern ways of working? And what are the trade-offs? What could be improved?
I'd just like to build on what Stephen said about, he visited one of the places that we have where drivers can come in. I think it's really important to remember that some gig economy work is very human. It's very easy to think of, we're a platform, we're a digital this, a digital that, an ecosystem. Well, yeah, sort of, but actually it's a very, very human way of working with, millions of passengers physically in a vehicle with hundreds of thousands of drivers every day. And I think that makes it, quite different from a lot of people's ideas about what a gig economy work actually is. I mean, I think what we're getting right is the ability for people who choose to earn a living with that total flexibility. And a lot of people don't realize quite how great that flexibility is. I mean, it is literally, you switch on the app, you log in, you say you would like to go online, and you wait for trip offers to come in, and a driver can literally accept or reject any single one. I mean, this is not about freedom to choose a shift. This is freedom to do a micro piece of work. And that really suits some people. And it's for all sorts of reasons. It could be caring, it could be children, it could be education. I mean, in fact, we one of the things that we offer drivers and their immediate family members is access to Open University courses. And we've got well over 1,000 people who are taking Open University courses. We've just had the first cohort of people graduating from the Open University. I mean, people are doing this in many cases as a route in their careers. I mean, you're mentioning, modern ways of working. It's not just about the gig economy. It's also over one's lifetime. One's going to do many different things, which is an exciting prospect for a lot of people. And Uber and other gig economy players can play an active part in someone's journey through their career. I think that's a really positive thing. I'd also say what we're getting right is recognizing that a relationship with unions such as the GMB can be particularly value-adding, I think, in a gig economy. So not only, there are the fundamentals that we have together. So obviously, the pensions, holiday pay, etc., which are kind of deep, important fundamentals. But actually at a micro level, we're getting a lot of things right in the sense that we do consult with GMB representatives when we're making changes, and they bring suggestions to us. So, I mean, just something very, very concrete was, I'd mentioned before the Sharia Pension Fund. That was something we did together. I think another one was training. So I feel very proud that our drivers are actually skilled workers. That's a very important thing. This is a skilled job. And it's not only a skilled job because you have to drive safely and in an entirely compliant way. But it's a skilled job because you've got people. This is a frontline job. I mean, you have to work with humans, and sometimes that's entertaining and sometimes that's challenging, and they're really good at that. Another thing we did together was de-escalation training. So when you have a passenger who gets very stressed because you're in a rush to catch a train, well, we created training to help drivers de-escalate situations like that. And then numerous pieces of work that we practically do together, which the GMP plays a crucial part. I mean, we do a lot of casework together. So a driver may have some regulatory compliance problem with their documents, or whatever. That's something that we can solve together. And I think, again, because it's a human and practical business, yes, an app's great, but an app cannot solve everything. Sometimes you need to actually work together. I mean, I think the main thing that we could do better at, really, Stephen has made very clear, which is it is absurd that there are, that you drive one trip and you get this, and another trip and you get none of it. That just doesn't make any sense. And, we also awaited an employment bill. There is government guidance, but I think otherwise letting the courts do the job just takes too many years. It makes no sense. It's inefficient for everyone. And I think that's the main thing that we can fix going forward. And I think it's absolutely possible to combine the flexibility that people want, but not everyone. I mean, there are people who want to be employees. Fine. That's a different thing, with rights and protections. I think that's absolutely possible to do that.
I heard there a lot about the technology, obviously, is moving really quickly and is really driving this flexible working and gig economy. How do you keep up with that?
I mean, it's difficult. Unions, bizarrely, are quite conservative organisations, and it does take an awful lot of thinking through, of trying to understand how the new world works. And what hasn't always helped with this is actually a lot of our experiences over the last 40 years. So things like flexibility and modernisation, you sit there and go, well, how can a union be against flexibility or modernisation? And the simple reason for that a lot of the time is because these are phrases that are used for attacks on workers' rights. So, if you take flexibility, it's been very much linked to 0 hours contracts. What we saw with lots of people on 0 hours contracts were the flexibility was all the employers. That actually a 0 hours contract and a flexibility was that you could be asked to do shifts at any time, and at the moment you refused, the phone stopped ringing. So a lot of our members, when they've heard flexibility, they think it's your flexibility. Exactly the same with modernisation. Modernisation, I've heard it so often when we're dealing with rail strikes, where people say, we're trying to modernise. And well, what does modernisation mean? Well, it means the double time I was getting on a Sunday is now flat time. It means that the 33% extra I was getting at night is now flat time. So your modernisation was my pay cut. And, and so sometimes when we sit there and see true flexibility like Uber, we go into it quite sceptically. We sat there at the start and kind of, well, where's the catch? And one of the things I talked about earlier was, how do we ring fence the gig economy? Because there's places like Uber where it works really well. There's other places where we're not quite as sure about. And, we had one, for example, which was a gig economy employer. I won't name it. And we did sort of pay talks and came out with a reasonable offer. But at a certain point in these pay talks, the employer or the platform owner, depending on how you want to put it, talked about, well, they want to make sure people turn up to work. And we said, well, there is a solution to that. It's called employment. And the whole idea that with some of these people, what you want is you want the flexibility on your terms. And I think that's the key difference with Uber. Technically, we have people with Uber drivers who for 6 months of the year will work long hours, earn very well. For the other 6 months of the year, they will do whatever they want. And for some people, that's absolutely key. I just want to touch on one thing Andrew talked about, and that's the access to justice issue. Because, as well as taking on Uber, and originally it was quite an adversarial relationship. It took, I'll be honest with you, quite a lot of trying to understand each other. I think us, a 150-year-old union trying to understand a load of sort of tech bros from California. I think a load of tech bros from California trying to understand the General Municipal and Boilermakers Association was probably took a degree of coming together. But what we're finding is, as well as taking on Uber, we are having similar arguments with a lot of their competitors. And the reality is it's taking so long to get through courts. We are sitting there with clear case law, and yet we have court dates 2-3 years ahead. And when you mentioned the Employment Rights Bill, I sat with the government on those every 3 months. We met, we put suggestions, we put ideas, and frankly, even the minister was looking embarrassed at the end of them. So if this is going to work properly, we really need investment in justice for workers. That means putting money back in the employment tribunal system. It means actually giving people the opportunity to have their case heard. And what this means fundamentally is that the better employers or the better platforms will stop being undercut by those who are worse. And when there's clear case law on that, it's frankly unforgivable. And hopefully, Stephen mentioned Labour's New Deal for working people. That's one of the things this needs to address.
So we've heard it's come a long way, but there's still quite a lot of work there left to do. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Andy, Stephen and Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you.